It's my pleasure to introduce Jeanne Mooney as our wonderful presenter. She's been at the church, and she and her family have been at the church for a very long time, even though they're quite young. They're still young, but at least by my measure. And their children were raised in the church, like most of our children. And I don't want to take more time. Maybe you can introduce yourself very briefly because we're eager to see your stuff. And we'll all mute ourselves, so you speak.
Well, welcome everyone. Happy Pi Day. I'm happy to be here presenting. I have way too many slides and way too many pictures, so I may be racing through a little bit on this presentation about the seasons of Mount Auburn because there's so much to see in every season. So as I mentioned to Mark yesterday, that it's kind of a photo essay rather than a naturalist discussion. So while there'll be lots of interesting things, and you might want to ask about the owls or the toads or the particular trees, I probably won't get into specifics about that. Here we go, and I'm just going to dash right in, and I'm going to kind of start with a springtime where we are right now, and this is an American toad that was at Asa Gray Garden a while back. So, why is this? Okay, about Mount Auburn. It was founded in 1831, and I'll just skip ahead that it's 175 acres and is an active cemetery and arboretum and wildlife sanctuary. So I'm sure many of you have been there. So I'm going to start with this time of year. They're amazing witch hazels for some of you who have been there, and I actually adore them. And this is one of my favorite ones called Jelena, which has this gorgeous burnt orange color that you can see. And they start for weeks in January. I absolutely adore them. I wish I had a garden big enough to have them. So you can see that even though it snows, the witch hazels are out. They're very different varieties here of them. And there are lots of them up near the Washington Tower area, or you can see them brightly across the landscape when you're walking at this time of year. If you see a yellow, it's likely to be a witch hazel. Here are more of them. Again, they've been blooming for 6 or 7 weeks, and they're actually very deliciously scented. So I encourage you always to go up and smell them because they're quite lovely. Here's more of that Jelena that I love. That's really beautiful. There's one that's near Alice's Fountain. If anyone knows that area, you can particularly see them there, or again below the tower. This is a beautiful one called Diana that has more of a red in it. That is also very beautiful. So this time of year, we get the snowdrops are coming out, and we've got snow, and there's a heron down here, and you never know. Some days things are iced over or not, and so things start blooming even though the snow is out. And with climate change, things are blooming earlier. This is something I love this time of year, the Cornus officinalis. Again, if you see, there's lots of yellows that start the year, and these are out blooming now. They start with lots of bud, and oftentimes you'll see the bees coming to them. And so that's another yellow that is out there. And also more yellow, winter aconite and the iris are up. So if some of you who went by around Willow Pond yesterday, you may already see the iris that are up. So those are a first harbinger of everything else to come. And these swaths of winter aconite are actually really beautiful. This is Cornus moss, which sometimes can look like the officinalis, but it's a different variety. And again, the bees love coming to that early. And there's one of these that's near Auburn Lake that's just beginning to bloom now, where one of the bird feeders, the winter suet bird feeders is. I hope I'm not going too fast for folks, but I want to make it through. So this is in the dell below the tower. This hazelnut is, I love these. Right now the paths unfortunately are Well, fortunately, they're being going to be rehabbed, so you can't walk up there right now. But I love the way these dangle like earrings every spring. So they're very delicate, like little dancers dangling. The winter hazel hasn't quite started yet, but again, a good place to see this is below the tower. Again, more yellow, springtime yellow. And those are quite delightful also. Now the weeping willows are just starting to come out. So this is actually a tree that was removed, but it was just a good picture. But the willows are starting to come out now. And I just love that little bit of yellow that's showing as the buds are coming and they'll be bud burst. I love you can see this all winter long, but the blood twig dogwood is beautiful in the landscape now that shows up. And you can sometimes find this viburnum dawn is a really early bloomer and has a lovely scent. There's one of these quite near Willow Pond, actually. So if you see something pink blooming now, it's likely to be this very early viburnum, and it's very delicious. So lots of things that will be coming shortly with this warmer weather. All the scilla and the chinodoxa, and you'll get the crocuses. So there's lots of color that will start emerging, and it's quite beautiful when you get these big covered areas of the blue scilla. It's really lovely. And again, the snowdrops have been out for quite a while, but there are different varieties of those. And then the cemetery will do their planters, which are quite lovely as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about the fact that during the pandemic, lots of places got, people were looking for places to go, and the cemetery was one of them, and it became so busy that they actually had to close the cemetery. And so this was the last day that I was there on March 29th, and it was sort of symbolic. There was a heron there. You can see that this time of year, the willows are coming out, and there was a heron there, and it flew off, and I sort of took it like, fly away, everyone, we have to leave the cemetery now. And it was kind of very sad. It was the first time the cemetery had ever closed. But I was fortunate, a couple of days later, I got a phone call from someone at the cemetery that said, would you be interested in photographing the cemetery during the pandemic? And the cemetery was actually open between 4 and 6 o'clock to mourners. And so I was invited to go into the cemetery while it was closed during those that 2-hour time period to photograph the cemetery. And it was sort of like, if the cemetery is closed, do the things still bloom? And they invited me to post on social media so that people knew that things were still beautiful in the cemetery and people could enjoy the color remotely. So let's see, where did my cursor just disappear to? Here it is. So as a result of that, they actually did a pandemic edition of Sweet Auburn, which came out in November. And I did a feature spread. I didn't know that at the time that they were going to do this, but they asked me to select some. I provided them with some pictures, and there was a spread about a little interview about my time in the cemetery during the spring of 2020. So this is a close-up of that time period. And I had hundreds of photographs, but these are the ones that they selected. So it was really enjoyable. And it was interesting that during the pandemic that a lot of things went on Zoom, and I actually met a lot of people via Zoom meetings there. But one of the things I love about the cemetery is seeing people there. And so it was very interesting not seeing people there except for the distance with the landscape crew. So continuing on here, this is one of my favorites at Weeping Higon cherries that are at Willow Pond. They are very beautiful. Some years they bloom better than others, but they create a lovely shower of color around the pond. Lots more pinks. We go from yellows to pinks at the cemetery. So there's azaleas and cherry trees. So it's just lovely when the rest of the trees haven't bud out, and so you see the color of the flowering trees are really dramatic in the cemetery before the other trees are blooming, and you get much more green. So the hellebores are out blooming too. Another good place to see those are below Washington Tower. But there are in other places as well, and those are early bloomers additionally. So in the Dell, which is one of my favorite places, that was where the cemetery was consecrated in 1831. There are lots of these native plants here. And the ferns and the trillium. And those are, unfortunately, some of the paths, there is one path that is still open because they're going to be doing some rehab, and you can see these a little bit later in the spring. And it's a nice place where you can see the trillium. All right. So this is what we call sort of having bud burst. I did some phenology studies at the cemetery, and this is one of the first things that they record is when the buds start bursting. This is part of phenology to understand whether or not the trees are, budding out earlier. And so people go and they actually record when this happens. And there's a certain number of trees and species that they study this with. This is one of my favorites. This red maple flowers are absolutely beautiful, and they should be one of the first of the trees to start blooming, and they're really beautiful to see. So those should be coming pretty quickly. I love, again, the sugar maple flowers. Again, before the leaves come out, these are really lovely, how they kind of dangle from the trees. This here is on this sugar maple, this number 42 is one of the trees that is on the phenology study. So it's one of the trees that people record from year to year and during different seasons. The magnolias, again, the bud burst of the magnolias. Hopefully we won't get a freeze or a weather storm, because sometimes that can really destroy the magnolias if they get hit. So hopefully we'll cross our fingers that we won't have a cold snap that will impact the magnolias. And here are some of those magnolias blooming. I love this particular yellow one that's not far from Willow Pond, is quite lovely. And I just love the buds of them. So there are various different magnolias out there. I won't get into all the names of them, but I hope you get over and enjoy them when they go. This is a sweet bay magnolia, which I happen to call out. Another tree that's actually on the phenology study, and it's great to see the bees coming out and enjoying, feeding off of these early blooms. This is a cucumber magnolia, which I think is fairly cool. Interesting how bud burst time frame, and I just love the light and the color on that, so it attracted me from photographically. So here are the Japanese maples in the springtime that come out. Some of you may know that the Japanese maples that are in Asa Gray Garden are maple trees that actually came from the Boston Public Library, that were moved from there when they were doing a building project, and the Garden Club of Boston arranged with Mount Auburn to have these trees moved to the cemetery. And then the Japanese maples, and well, this is the Japanese maple. Oopsie, let me go back. This is the Japanese maple, and this is another red maple that's here, and it's these ones here that were from the Boston Public Library. So this was another spring picture that I took, and it was fun. There was a collage artist who's actually exhibited, John Williams, who has exhibited at the Belmont Gallery of Art, saw this photograph, and he had been selected as an artist in residence at Mount Auburn, and he did 4 collages of those different seasons. And he asked me if he saw this photograph that I had posted, and so he did a collage based on this photograph. So that was really fun to see. He's a really interesting artist. So there's my photograph, and there's his collage, and that's in the dry dell. So more things, the starting to bloom. Lots of the color that you can find, things in great areas of swaths of a color. Again, the pink and the yellow are so much fun to see. Crab apples that are blooming. Again, here's one that's just starting on the right-hand picture, just bud burst, and then full bloom. The dogwoods that come out, and these are some native dogwoods, and then the Kuza dogwoods. And last year, the Kuza dogwoods were absolutely phenomenal. So from year to year, the dogwoods can, bloom differently. Red buds in the dell. There's several of them in there. Again, the lovely pink with the bright green of spring. Epimedium. This was an area called Alice's Fountain, and I love the bright fresh green of the weeping katsuras, and the epimedium are really lovely. I just chose these, put these together. It's just color fun. These are some quince and bleeding heart, and this is a Norway spruce cone. Just some other spring images. There was a heron at Willow Pond. Again, the kind of the fresh green, and then bulbs that the cemetery plants that are starting to that will emerge. And then the cemetery has a whole planting area of in different zones, and they arrange these, and they'll take certain bulbs out and put things in, and every year it changes up over here. But these irises are in one bed that come up every year, and lots of beautiful color. So there's always something to enjoy at the cemetery. So I'm going to talk a little bit about citizen science programs there, and I won't read them through, but there are about 16 different programs going on. Actually, the silk moth and butterfly propagation project's on hold, but I participate in the winter bird survey. I've done the phenology study, the breeding survey, and nest watch I've done the caterpillar count. Amphibians, I help monitor redback salamanders. So there's so many projects and walks that you can go on. I encourage you, if you follow Mount Auburn on social media or get their newsletter, you'll find out that there are some really interesting walks. So there's lots of a great sustainability program at Mount Auburn, and the citizen science program is a really wonderful program if you enjoy nature and to get to know people. So here's the phenology program. I mentioned earlier how the trees that are marked, and phenology is to say the study of cyclic and seasonal natural phenomena, especially in relation to climate and plant and animal life. So really, what happens on phenology, we use the phenology to mostly at Mount Auburn to talk about the trees, but really it's about the timing of when the trees bloom and insects come out and birds arrive. So with climate change, these cycles can get thrown off, so that if migratory patterns, birds are on certain migratory patterns based on light, and if they arrive to the cemetery and things have already bloomed and there aren't caterpillars there for them to feed to continue migration, or if there's breeding behavior and they're feeding for that, or also after when birds are needing to feed their young, if those cycles are thrown off, that can really affect a lot of things. Also, the warming climate, you've got sugar maples that are going further north, and so all these plants and trees and wildlife, birds and insects rely on these cycles to work together. So this was back in 2017, when I was doing the phenology study. As I say, we go around to each of these trees, and Carrie Goldberg from WBUR was interested in doing an article, and she came out and walked the cemetery with a group of us, and I was taking photographs. So then when she went to do her article, she contacted me for some photographs for her story. And so these were the three photographs that were in her story that I had taken. Interestingly enough, just 2 days ago, WBUR did another piece, some of you may have seen, or you could look it up, also on climate change, talking about, again, the blooming of things earlier and earlier, and how the cemetery needs to be mindful of what they're planting. So I know that, for instance, we're a zone 6 or 6A, and they might be start to plant things from zone 5 or the mid-Atlantic area. And so the cemetery needs to always, keep in mind, we want native species, but also, what is native when if we move things from different zones so that we can provide habitat or trees that can survive here. So that was a fun project, and some of these folks I still do some citizen science projects with. So this is the winter bird survey. So there are suet feeders that go up in 3 different locations at the cemetery, and it's a couple that has this organic suet, and they fill the feeders, and then I get together with folks. I happen to go with a group on Wednesday, and we go to each of the feeders, and we record for 3 minutes all the birds that visit the feeders or are nearby, and we fill out, someone records on data sheets, and those are submitted. So it's a great way. This is an orange-crowned warbler that has been wintering over there, which has been fun. And there's some also other birds that have been staying. Another indication of climate change when you have birds that are not migrating, and then of course if they have a food source. So this is the nesting, breeding and nesting survey that I worked on. So this is just a selection of, there are actually some birdhouses. We've got woodpeckers, you've got the robins, song sparrows, and this picture up here was actually a red-tailed hawk that successfully had a nest last year, which was terrific news. But we go out actually sometimes for the breeding bird survey. We might be there for 2 or more hours, because you see a bird, flying with nesting material. We actually go to certain areas to observe the breeding birds. I don't have a picture of that tag of marker, but we go to particular sites and record the birds that we see. But oftentimes when I'm doing some of the nest things, and you see a bird carrying a worm or nesting material, and you can end up getting waylaid for a long time trying to find where a bird may be nesting. Here's another project, amphibians. There's a spotted salamanders that breed at Mount Auburn, live and breed there in the vernal pool. In the Dell, a vernal pool is an area that water does not, it's not a natural way for it to drain in or go out. So vernal pools naturally dry up and there's no fish, and that's why salamanders breed there. The spotted salamanders will come from actually sometimes miles away. There's some of them in the cemetery, and they're burrowed down, and they come in this. Actually, it's getting to be mid-March when you get a rainy evenings above sort of 55 degrees and raining in mid-March. The salamanders will start moving towards the vernal pools. And so this picture here is actually one of the rare times that can go into the cemetery at night. Is we've gone in to observe the salamanders, because you don't really, that's the time that they're there, and they go into the pool and lay their eggs. And so that's monitoring, and we can watch how many egg sacs develop in the pool there. So they're fun. Toads was the beginning, my picture that I had on the beginning. So the American toads were reintroduced at Mount Auburn very successfully. And every time around this, it's always around April 8th. It's the same first week in April. The toads will congregate a lot of the time in Halcyon and also at Willow Pond. We don't really see them at Auburn Lake, which is a little bit of a mystery, but they'll breed there and call. And if you're at the cemetery, you can actually hear them from a while. You might be approaching the cemetery and hear a sound, and you can hear them. And there's lots of interesting breeding activity. And then almost about let's see, I'm gonna have to turn off, let's see. I don't want that slide to play. So then about 2 months later, in the first week of June, the toads that, they've gone through metamorphosis, and then the baby toadlets emerge from the area. This is over at Halcyon Lake, which is mostly where you can see they're predominantly emerge from. But you'll see they're the size of your fingernail. The picture in the upper right-hand corner, if you look closely, you can see all these little brown, things. Those are all the toadlets. And the ground actually kind of vibrates with them moving, and it's quite a sight to see. It only happens over 2 or 3 days, and sometimes it might be for 1 week, and then if there was another breeding cycle, it might be several weeks later. There might be another emergence of them, but it's quite the sight to see. Oopsie, go back. So the other salamanders that are there are the redback salamanders, and those were reintroduced into the Dell area several years ago. They're different morphs. There's the redback, and then this one up here is actually a gray morph, but they're still called redback salamanders. And we go in, and there are these cover boards. They are naturally occurring in the duff of the leaf duff and under logs and areas. But there are these cover boards that are throughout the cemetery or some particular areas. And we go and look under the boards every couple of weeks and see if there are salamanders there, and count and measure them. And hopefully, there will be more salamanders, or a good measure of the forest health. So they are fun. So pollinator gardens. There are gardens that are there to enjoy, but they're also there to encourage pollinators. And there is another project there to observe. It's a flower visitor study. This is the big, lovely meadow area up. It's actually technically a meadow, but up at the tower, where there's lots of pollinator plants, and there's one down by Willow, and another one over at the greenhouses, and then there's one near where the apiary area was. So here at the Flower Visitor Study, it's a photographic study, and you actually go and photograph all the everything that's visiting a flower. And so it can be kind of hard to catch them all, but it's recorded all the bees and insects that could possibly be there. Some more pollinator activity, sweat bees. You can see all these little, teeny little bees, butterflies, moths, bumblebees, western honey, moths. So it's quite fun. I actually put this here. This was I wanted to make a mention of the cellophane bees that actually could be coming out now just below the tower. Cellophane bees are underground, and they will nest solely in one hole. And you can see actually there's some that nest next door to me, and I see them regularly there. But at the cemetery, if you ever see little bees like this, and they have little mounds, and they're flying around, they won't sting you. I've photographed. I don't have a picture of it right here because it's not from Mount Auburn, but these bees coming in and out, and I've gotten right up close and never have been, stung by them. So they're really interesting, how they are solitary in each one of their own little areas. And this is a little sweat bee on over at the greenhouse gardens there. So black swallowtails, again, that's one of the things when you're up observing and doing and looking for things, you come across things that you might not expect to see. And this is last year. I was up at the tower, and these black swallowtails were. I thought, what is that interesting shape there? And then I realized, oh, it's swallowtails that are mating. So there's a monarch study that I had done too, where up there's areas where there are we've got we call out areas to look for different types of milkweed, and go and examine the plants to see whether or not there are any milkweed or monarch eggs. And this is how teeny they are. They're absolutely, and so you have to go and look underneath the leaves and look for these, eggs, and hopefully go back, and they will emerge, and you'll have different end star stages. And we've actually measured them there of the monarchs before they go in their chrysalis. And this was fun. This was a monarch and a honeybee sharing some milkweed here. So one of the other things that we'll see mostly up at the tower, they're not native, but praying mantis, they're kind of fun to see. And they like to be up where all the bees are in the gardens, and they will sit and pray. And have watched them feed on the bees that are landing. And then at the end of this is kind of later in the season that you'll see them at the size, and then this is them breeding here, and then there was an egg sac that was created. So up in all of the tall material that's up at the tower. So they're kind of fun. So moths and butterflies, again, just a selection of things. This is actually a blinded sphinx moth that are here. I was actually looking for something else. I think I was doing some birding in the dry dell, and I thought, oh, that's some weird looking lichen or something on that monument. And I went over, and it was these moths breeding again. So quite interesting. And swallowtails, and I think, let's see, that is the I think that's a mourning cloak. So there was someone who was introducing Luna moths and Cecropia that is sort of on hold right now, but there was someone who was breeding those and bringing these to the cemetery. and having them releasing. We actually had caterpillars that were attached to their host trees. So this was the caterpillars being put on a host tree, and then they would emerge, or she would have some of them, whoopsie, let me go back, at home, and then release them. Oopsie, I keep on going back here. So, or they'd have them at her home, and then she would bring them to the cemetery to release. And this was at one of the release events. You can see it on your when they're on Joel's shirt there. So they were released into the cemetery to hopefully stay again to introduce more diversity, to have these moths there. This is the Cecropia, these native giant silk moth. Again, this was these were attached to their host plant. And then there were some Cecropias that were released too, also that had been raised. And unfortunately, once you release these things, often the birds will find them right away. So sometimes they don't last too long because they're so delicious. But this was at a release event up at the tower. And, you know, when they haven't been flying yet. And so they'll kind of sit and warm themselves. And then you can hold them, and then poof, they go off. So, but then you'd go back and you'd find where they might land on a plant, and then, you know, you go back the next day, or you look for them, and they've gone because they've been food for the birds. Dragonflies, there's another dragonfly study there I haven't participated in, but you'll see those at the water bodies. So there are folks, there's someone who is studying actually the skeleton of the dragonflies, but they're fun to see there as well in the summertime. Mushrooms, there's now actually a Mount Auburn mushroom guide that was put together. And this is this is a Berkey Bond. I'm forgetting the name of it now. I should have written it down. But this is some enormous ones that can occur. And you know, we'll go around. Some years are you know, more wet than others. And last year was a big year for mushrooms because of the moisture. And you can go around, and there are actually some mushroom walks that take place that you can find that are open to anyone to join. And so you'll see the mushrooms there as well. And there's a fellow by the name of Larry Melman, who's been cataloging all the mushroom sightings at Mount Auburn. Lichen is another thing that also are studied too. Some people think the lichen is ugly on monuments. Other times people feel like the lichen is like aging. It shows how long something is. So there's kind of mixed feelings. I think that the lichen is kind of cool on the monuments. So Mount Auburn doesn't, you know, scrub things clean. They let things happen. I mean, they'll restore things, but they're not out there removing lichen. So these are one of my favorites, the gray tree frog babies. I don't have any pictures actually of the mature tree frogs, but around August time, oftentimes in the Dell where they have been bred, these are the really teeny tree frogs that are really fun. And they're really masters of disguise, and you kind of have to look really closely to find them because they blend in so easily with the habitat. So they're fun to see. I've been seeing them up more at the tower as well, because they'll be in the dell and then move up above the tower areas are another good place to see them. Bullfrogs, there aren't actually a lot of regular green frogs at the cemetery, but you'll see the bullfrogs, hear them and see them. Oftentimes at, you know, Willow Pond and in the Dell. So they're there as well. Turtles, see the turtles that are there. This was actually a pollinator garden here down at Willow Pond, and we were planting some native plants there a couple of years ago, and I put my shovel in to plant something, and up came I realized, thankfully I didn't go too deep, and I discovered these turtle eggs that were down there. So there actually are oftentimes snapping turtle eggs that people have found, and cemetery will cordon off that area to protect the eggs. Muskrats, I was mentioning them earlier. They're fun to see there. I've seen them kind of all winter long. They'll come out and munch on the banks. They don't really care if you're there or not. They'll eat the grass and then go and nest. And it's fun to see little muskrat babies. So they're out and about. Yes, the woodchucks, bane of my gardener existence, but there are woodchucks there. These were actually, you can't tell, these are a mature one, but this was a teeny little baby. There were some woodchuck babies last year. They were absolutely adorable. So, you'll find little burrow areas, and that, there's activity, and then they'll, scurry around. So they're fun to see. Raccoons. Yes, there were some raccoons who were hanging out inside this drainage area down at Willow Pond. This was at Auburn Lake, where we had the suet feeder a couple of years ago, and the raccoons were able to pull down the suet feeder, so we finally came up with a locking system. So they are there in the cemetery. Yes, there were deer there. There are not deer anymore, but a couple of years ago, there were 2 deer that got into the cemetery, either when the gates were open, or actually they can kind of get under a couple of areas in the cemetery and some gates. And they were munching away at a lot of the newly planted native plants, particularly around Indian Ridge, which was not so great. And so they were devouring. They were there all season long. But eventually they did leave the cemetery. So they were fun to see, but not good for an arboretum trying to maintain its native plants and rehabilitate areas where they've spent a lot of time and money to create areas just to have the deer come and munch it away. They had to replant some areas of the Indian Ridge because of the deer. Don't have too many good coyote pictures, but there are coyotes there. I think I had some coyote pictures from somewhere from a few years ago, but not every year. They've had dens in the past. Last year, I don't believe there was a den. But this is Joel and I were out walking kind of end of day a couple of months ago, and all of a sudden this coyote just went, trotting by. We were and I quick pulled out my camera and just caught a couple of fast shots. I have seen them in the Dell area, more up close, but oftentimes getting a photograph of them is tough. But they are there, and in the evening there is actually a coyote cam where someone studies the coyotes, and they can see them coming and going, after 9 o'clock or early in the morning, and so they come and go throughout the cemetery. So we'll have to see if they create a den or not. But I haven't seen any denning activity. Sometimes they'll create dens and then not use them in the cemetery, but they definitely come and go and feed there. Okay, so I have lots of heron pictures because I do not have a long lens for taking lots of birds, but the heron, I love the hawks and herons, and the herons are just so much fun to photograph because they really don't care too much about you being there. And you'll just go and see them, and so I've enjoyed seeing the heron all year round there, actually, in all of at Halcyon and Auburn Lake and Willow. So, and I've watch them. You can see the heron. Sometimes they'll be stalking and waiting, and you'll finally see them, catch a goldfish there. So again, different areas, and I just kind of liked all the texture in these pictures. But they'll just kind of hang out, and they don't mind being photographed. So we were mentioning earlier about the peaceable kingdom. So one day, oftentimes, there was a hawk and heron. So Joel and I talk about when we have a successful day at Mount Auburn is when we've seen a hawk and a heron. And if we ever had a pub, we would call it the hawk and heron. But so this hawk and heron were hanging out. Oftentimes, if you want to look for particularly, whoopsie, see, where did I keep on messing with my cursor here. And now it's disappeared. There it is. Oh, there we go. Go back. There we go. So they'll hang. Look at the weeping katsura. This picture here is on the right is at Willow Pond, and oftentimes the heron will and the hawk will hang out at the very top of these trees. So kind of when you go to the water bodies, check the tops of trees, and oftentimes you'll see the heron, and then this one day the hawk and heron were just hanging out together. So it was kind of fun to see. They didn't mind each other. Maybe it was a juvenile hawk that didn't quite know what to do. Oftentimes you see juvenile hawks and they have kind of silly behavior because maybe they don't know any better. Here are some cormorant that you never know. Sometimes you'll get a bird that, that more unusual that usually isn't there, or they come over from Alewife area, but there was a cormorant that was hanging out for a little while. And between Willow and Auburn Lake, and so that was fun to photograph. There was this black-capped heron. I saw this over, I believe, at Auburn Lake. I think it was last year, and they're fun to see. They're oftentimes over in Watertown at the Watertown Dam or Winchester, but they'll see them now and again at Mount Auburn. The hawks. So mostly we see the red-tailed hawks that are often at the cemetery, and we hope that we have a successful breeding. There was a successful breeding last year where they created a nest, and so kind of keeping an eye now to see if we have a nest this year. And they're there, all year round, and they're fun to see. This time of year, you'll get several of them. Oftentimes up at the tower, they'll start breeding, and you'll sometimes get 4 or 5 of them together while they're breeding behavior, and then they'll call out a territory. So the Cooper's hawk is another one that's fun to see there. They've bred at the cemetery. A couple of years ago, there was a nest that they created, and unfortunately, it failed. We found a egg on the ground from a failed nest, and then they did eventually have another successful nest with about 3 fledglings that we watched throughout the season. And once they fledge, they actually become, I think this is one of the immature ones from that same season. They're almost the same size as the adult. So hopefully, they may nest as well in Mount Auburn. This was the year where there were 3 juveniles here. I think there's 1, 2, and then 3 of them down here that were kind of hanging out, and they were learning how their parent would drop chipmunks or squirrels, and they would try and figure out how to eat them or how to pick up sticks. And it's funny it's just fun to watch the juvenile behavior as they're learning how to do things. So they're fun to see. And there are owls there right now. I don't have, again, great owl pictures to show you, but the owls are there. This actually great horned owl was in the cemetery a couple of weeks ago. haven't seen it. It's kind of like a needle in a haystack trying to find them unless they're calling. But there have been not really successful nesting activities. You can see them over at Fresh Pond, but there was a great horned owl there the other couple of weeks ago. The barred owls have been there. This is a barred owl. Whoops, go back. And there's a screech owl. That little, I don't have a close up of the teeny little screech owl that's sitting up here is adorable. So the owls do come, but they haven't been breeding there. So I just put this in here. Again, this is kind of nesting bird behavior. You think, oh, it's just a mallard, but here's this mallard with all these ducklings, and all those ducklings here are actually underneath this. They're hiding. It's kind of like the Nutcracker. all the babies hiding under there. And then as they grow, here they are. We kind of observe them. It's kind of just fun to see the turkeys, the ducklings, and you find a nest and you kind of watch them grow. And sometimes there might be 4 or 5, and then there's only 3, and there's been predation or something going on. So yes, the turkeys are there. They don't like to encourage the turkeys there, but they are there in the springtime. Yes, they'll get 1 year. I don't know if this is the particular. There was a turkey who had, I think, 15 or 16 little babies, and I think by the end of the season they were down to 4 or 5. And it was like, yay, they made it through, but they'll start with a large brood and, with the hawks and, other predators around. But the turkeys are not encouraged because they can be aggressive. Now this is just jumping ahead now moving on to the seasons now as we get later into the year with lots of little colorful beds that are out in Mount Auburn too, that they plant. And again, these are also serve great, pollinator activity and color and enjoyment. Season progressing here. This is Asa Gray Garden, and they've got irises. Again, a pollinator activity that's happening. So the cemetery has got lots of things that are blooming, throughout the season. So there's always something to enjoy. Again, as the season progresses, other things will come out for the pollinators. This bugbane and the buttonbush. This is near the Dell, that are fun to see. And this is this black digger wasp, oftentimes on the clethra. So there's lots of pollinator activity and that the cemetery provides habitat for. But I really love the candles on the bugbane. There are several areas in the cemetery where you can find that. So more trees. So the horsenet trees are absolutely beautiful in the cemetery. So here are some, they'll be out for several weeks in different areas. This one here is right above, whoops, go back, right above Willow Pond. And again, another great place for the pollinators. You can often see bees on the horse chestnuts. This is a fringe tree that I happen to just enjoy. It's just lovely. Again, not there, trees at Mount Auburn that are native and non-native, but it's an arboretum. So they plant things from all different areas. And again, the fringe tree is nice for the pollinators. The tulip trees. The tulip trees are interesting because they get to be really enormous, and these flowers are sometimes way up high, and you'll sometimes see the flower drop to the ground, and you can appreciate them. But they're so high that you can't often appreciate the beauty of the tulip trees. But they're lovely. There's a beautiful tulip tree actually near Willow Pond. There's several areas in the cemeteries where they are. The golden rain tree is another glorious one that they have at the Mount Auburn. I didn't put in, actually, I should have put in a picture of the seed pods afterwards in the fall. They have these beautiful kind of crispy seed pods that are really interesting. But the golden rain tree is another beautiful tree to see as the seasons progress into the summertime. This is now just a picture of kind of everything's emerged, and it's very lush. And by this time of year, when all the trees are out and you're trying to do birding activity, it's great to look for birds and nesting and things before the trees come out. But here we are with everything is emerged, and it's just really lush and beautiful. So here's some unexpected things. So oftentimes we're going for a walk. This was just walking. This was last June, actually. I don't know if folks remember all the forest fires, and we had those few days with all that smokiness, and we were walking there, and this is not Photoshop. This is the sun looking like this orange fireball because of the smoke in the air, and it just kind of created this cool look over Halcyon. Again, summertime, you never know what you're going to see. This was the end of the day. I love it when the days are long. This is an Asa Gray garden, and some of the sunsets that you get there are really beautiful. And I just like this with the zinnias. The gardeners do a lot of put things in the Asa Gray garden so that you've got bloom, all year round. And, the sunset just emerges, and yeah, it's lovely. This is in August. The nighthawks migrate, and you can sign up. They're like usually 3 nights. Again, not that many times that you get to go into the cemetery at night. And they do nighthawk observations on the top of Washington Tower. And you maybe only do about 10 or so, a dozen people at most, not even that, to go up over several nights to watch the nighthawks. And this is a little nighthawk right up here that someone's observing. Sometimes you see them or you don't see them, but it's just really fun to be up there. And some nights you get spectacular sunsets from on the top of the tower. So again, going on as the season is moving along, this is this glory bower that I love. You can see this not far from Auburn Lake, and I always enjoy the beautiful color of the berries on this. Other things, this is a very interesting variegated sweet gum. That I just loved the way that it colored. And this is a particular ginkgo, an autumn gold ginkgo that has this beautiful color in it. So those are trees that I always go back to year after year because, sometimes they have the same color, sometimes they don't, depends upon temperature and moisture and drought or not. And so the trees are can be different from year to year, but I sort of like going back and checking on certain trees to see what they're like. Here are some of the ginkgos. The really cool thing about the ginkgos is there's a certain point in the fall where the temperature changes and all of the leaves on the ginkgo fall at once. So you'll be there one day and the next day you'll go and it'll just be this carpet of all the leaves. And it's really kind of stunning. Some of I didn't take a picture of the ginkgos. There's male and female, and the female ginkgos. They can be stinky ginkgos, so you want to watch your feet around the female ginkgos. But and they can be messy, but they're really beautiful. But yeah, this whole carpet of green. There's one that actually in Asa Gray Garden that does this same thing, that you don't have to go too far. You can just be there and parking in the circle there, and that tree will just all of a sudden one day there'll just be a carpet of ginkgo leaves. Okay, the Japanese maples. They are glorious to see in the spring when they come out, and then in the fall, they fire, and the structure of them is absolutely beautiful. There are people who spend lots of glorious, fabulous photographs of the Japanese maples that people do, and people go back to the same Japanese maple year after year because they just love them. So again, they just, you know, you just show up and they're there. You don't have to do anything um, special sometimes to photograph them. And I just love the gnarly structure of them. And they're just absolutely gorgeous in the landscape to enjoy. And again, usually they'll fire and then all the leaves will fall. Here was an example, again, some other Japanese maples where the leaves will all of a sudden all fall. There was a couple of years ago where they didn't, I'm forgetting the scientific term now, but the temperature, the leaves did not fall, so the leaves stayed on the trees all winter long, and it was a little bit odd. But normally they all fall and create a lovely carpet. Just more fall color. This is beautiful color down at Willow Pond. This is the knees of the cypress knees that are at Auburn Lake, and just walking around, and all of a sudden you see, just the color. You never know the next corner what you might see. More beautiful fall color at the monuments. Again, certain trees that I know tend to fire that I seek out. So just lovely, lovely color. This is just a fall. I just did a wide angle shot here at Willow. And again, here we are, another season, and lots of beauty to be had. This was an Assagray garden. This was actually in November. It was at the end of I was just taking a walk. I was going back to my car, and this when I go out with my camera, and a lot of these actually are iPhone photographs. I have a little zoom camera, but this is not. I'm not taking these pictures with anything super high tech. I mean, I would love to have a different lens, but I was just coming back to my parked car at the end of the day. And this scene just presented itself. It was lovely to see that, but just this, adult and child sitting there, and it was just really poignant. And I just snapped the picture, and the light, and it was just a lovely moment, and it just was there. I didn't go looking for it. I just kind of have your eyes open for what may be. Here's another example where you never know what you're going to see. We went for a walk, and there was the possibility for snow, but we went out, and the sky was a blue sky. When we were in the cemetery, a snow squall came through, this crazy snow squall that just blew in. And we were at Willow Pond. There was a heron there, and the heron was going, "What's going on with this weather?" And we thought, well, we'll just stay. We're not going to leave. We're over at Willow Pond. And this squall blew through, and we went up to the tower, and this was the scene of the storm blowing through. Again, we couldn't have anticipated that. It just happened to be the luck of the draw to happen to be there when this went through. Again, you never know what you're going to get at the cemetery, and there was, double rainbow. Oftentimes, if it's, I think folks know when there's raining, it's the afternoon, you go, is there a chance of a rainbow? And lucked out, and there was a rainbow. And I was actually able to go inside of Bigelow and take a picture from upside there. So it was quite the stunner. Again, you never know what you're walking in the evening and you're coming back to the parking lot, or you're, the end of our walk, and we go by Halcyon and then back, and the sky just is beautiful. This is a winter solstice. Some of you may have gone to that. That's something that Mount Auburn has started doing for about 3 weeks, beginning of December and ending on solstice. And they had this light show, and they projected things onto Bigelow Chapel. This sort of eclipse. Let me go back. There was a memorial candle lighting inside a Bigelow, and so that's another something that experiencing the cemetery at night was really interesting. So it was really combination of mood and light and remembrance during the winter solstice. This again happened just to be a tree that I call this my Ukatasana tree because I feel like this tree is doing an Ukatasana pose. But just an example of one tree. I should have had found the picture of it in bloom. So this was, it bare. Actually, I took this picture on March. Facebook is interesting how it told me that I took this picture 4 years ago, and I included it here because I'll go back to the same tree to look at it, and I know somewhere I have a picture of it in bloom, but I couldn't find it to include it here. But again, how the landscape is different. Again, this is in the fall where all these beautiful tall grasses have gone, and the light is changing, and it's still the dry texture of these grasses, and they stand all winter long. They're just beautiful. This is going towards the greenhouse area, and just the light at Willow Pond. So again, beauty as we're getting towards the fall. And then, approaching winter, and here we are winter at Mount Auburn. And we go there all seasons long. The roadways are plowed, and it's great to go and look for tracks and birds, and you can try and find the coyote tracks as well. But this is Assagray Garden, where there was that picture earlier of it all in spring bloom and fall beautifulness, and just here we are in winter. And I find it beautiful too. I love winter at Mount Auburn, where you can see the structure of the trees is particularly lovely. Again, the long shadows. This was up at the tower. So earlier I showed you the meadow, the pollinator garden, were up at the tower. So this is that pollinator garden up at the tower, at winter time. Again, kind of after a snow, it's lovely to go over there, and just the way the snow is, on the trees and the monuments is quite lovely. Sometimes we'll go. This is actually down at Willow Pond. No one else had been there. Sometimes it's fun to go over there, and you realize you're kind of the first one cutting the tracks right around the pond, because they plow the roads, but they're not plowing the pathways. So it's kind of fun to go over there. Again, winter walks. This is where a little bit of iciness. You got to be careful in certain areas, but we have certain walks that we like to do, and we'll sometimes put on our special shoes to go to certain areas. But again, just really lovely light. And then even in the winter time, this is winter. And again, we have snow or don't have snow, but sometimes the heron are still there. Hunkering down or waiting for some ice to melt. You'll see, birds hanging out. So there's still, birds that will overwinter there. Here we are. This is some birds that were hanging out near the feeder, the winter feeder at Auburn Lake. Opportunity to get some water that they need to get through winter time. A titmouse and a sparrow and a chickadee. And again, just happened to come upon them. This is an area going into the Dell. This is in the Dell, the wintertime. Again, you kind of just making your own tracks in these areas for the winter, and it's pretty quiet. Here we are. Here's Joel plowing through an area in the Dell. This was just some lovely ice. You never know what you're going to run across. That happened. Just notice this formation of iciness on the ground and some long shadows at Willow Pond there. Again, just the structure of the trees that you can see, kind of stark beauty, but just lovely to see. And I just enjoy going to all areas of the cemetery and seeing when we have the snow, what Mount Auburn looks like during the snow. So that brings us to the end of our season. And here we are. This is actually a table monument by one of my favorite carvers there. And I've just loved the way, this monument looks in the summertime and in the wintertime, and the reflection off of it. And I just wanted to end to that, just to share what the seasons of Mount Auburn are always beautiful.